This will be a very fun presentation. I'm coming out of Baltimore, Maryland. I'm about 5 miles from the Baltimore headquarters. And if you've not worked with me before, my name is Chris Gordon. I'm a finance consultant at RPI, and I've been with RPI for a little over 7 years now. And this is a very timely presentation for me personally because I'm wrapping up a CloudSuite Financials v11 implementation for a California client, and we're actually in the middle of another one for a client in Kansas City. So a lot of the stuff we're going to go through here, we've implemented, we've seen work, we've seen benefit clients, and we're happy to share with everyone on the phone too. Cindy, do you want to say hi?
I will say hi. I'm coming from Asheville, North Carolina. You can figure that out from my accent, I'm sure. At least I'm from the South, right? I've been in the Infor space since about '98, so I'm very, very old. I've been with RPI for 7 years, so I'm liking hanging out there pretty much. Done CloudSuite, started 2 or 3 years ago with CloudSuite projects, and it's pretty fun. It's our first real big change in the finance world in many, many years. So it's been a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll think so as well.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about here? There's obviously a ton of stuff in CloudSuite Financials. We could spend hours talking through everything from GL to AP to asset management and AR and all the new forms and reports and features that we've come across and Infor built into their software in CloudSuite Financials. But the goal of this 50-minute session is to really just focus on some of the most important that Cindy and I feel we want to get out there and share with everyone here. So with that said, you know, the first thing we're going to touch on is the freedom to reimagine your global ledger, your GL. We'll talk about some flexible reporting structures and how you can build hierarchies that adapt to your organization's growth. New fund accounting functionality that's built into the system or that will be built into the system. Integrated AP Invoice workflow. Richard Stout was mentioning that a little bit on the keynote earlier this morning. That's one of the coolest things within AP is that workflow is now built into the system. There's also standard workflow events, and we'll talk about those and how you can benefit from them. Automated bank reconciliation within our cash management system, and then we'll wrap up with just basically the fact that Infor's tracking everything you're doing. Every click, every save, every change is being tracked, which makes some people happy, and now some people can't get away with some stuff. But in general, this is a very good thing. As we're going through, feel free to type in questions. We're not going to save questions to the very end. If you got something on your mind, put it in the chat. And Simeon, if we don't catch it right away, just come back and let us know it's out there so we don't skip it.
Got it.
And this will be recorded too. They might have to cut out the first 15 minutes of blank airtime, but all right, we're reimagining the GL. Version 10 and before, we have our accounting unit structure. And that accounting unit structure rolls up to our company. And we can only have one. We have our chart of accounts. And we have the way that accounts are rolling up to summaries and how we need to have that set up. But we only can attach one chart of accounts to a company. You might also have projects. And, you know, in activity management, you can have multiple activity groups and whatnot. But for the most part, what you're looking at here is all you can really code to a transaction, to a requisition or an invoice or a journal entry. That's changing, and it's changing drastically. What we're looking at here is a snapshot of your enterprise group where you make a determination of, okay, what are we going to be tracking? What are our dimensions? What are the elements that are most important to us? Yes, it might be your company accounting unit account project. It might just be that, or this is a really good time to think a little bit more and see what's most important to your organization, what matters most from a reporting perspective, from a tracking perspective, and build those out as your dimensions. All right, so you have up to 14 dimensions. Cindy, we've not seen anyone use 14 dimensions. I see average 5 or 6.
Yes.
And that's important because as you go into the design phase, you're saying, oh, cool, I can start tracking 14 things. I have all this stuff that I can keep track of now. But from the end user's perspective, that means there's going to be 14 fields on a transaction. You can't hide them. If you have built them out here and set them up on your structure, they're going to show on every single transaction. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're going through this. Attributes. So you might be coding certain attributes to invoices and running reports from a different system based on those attributes. Well, maybe those attributes can become a dimension. If it's important enough to be putting on every invoice, maybe it should go into your GL finance code block. Not everything does, though, right? One department might be keeping track of something and another department doesn't really care. So that's where you need to distinguish what is truly important, what matters to my organization. And just some other things here, you define those dimensions and you define what's required. Out of the box, your company and your account are required dimensions. And then you can simply just check off any other one that you need to require all the time. So in this case, we have company, account, and division as the 3 dimensions that we're going to require all the time. Work order and plant for this organization weren't required, but they can enter them if they choose. And also something we're not going to touch on specifically here, but structure relations. The old GL 20.2s where you're allowing certain accounting units and accounts to link up and to marry, that goes away and it's replaced with structure relations, which is a way more robust way of controlling what dimensions can interact and hang out with the other dimensions. All right, hierarchies, that's another keyword too in CloudSuite. We have a dimension, but we have hierarchies within that dimension. For example, our chart of accounts is technically a dimension. Account is a dimension. Within that account dimension, we can build out as many charts as we need. Maybe we have a master chart that we have for a government reporting agency that we need to send financials to. But maybe we have an internal chart where we're excluding some of the accounts that we send for the government's reporting requirements. So we can have as many charts as we need. You just have to ask yourself, who are we reporting our financials to? How do they want to see it? And we can structure the accounts that way. Jumping out of the account dimension into the project dimension, a totally separate dimension, the same rule applies. We can have as many hierarchies as we want within the project dimension. Maybe we have a master list of projects, but we want to carve out a certain piece of those projects and just report on those separately. And we have a hierarchy to do so there. Same thing with your cost centers. In the old world, you had one structure, one cost center structure. If you needed to see things rearranged, cost centers moving up under different summaries, typically that was maintained in a third-party reporting system. You don't need that anymore. If you have different ways that you need to report on your organizational structure, you can set those up in your ERP system. Some screenshots here to kind of visualize what we just talked about. from the chart of accounts, we have on the top left window, 3 different charts for this one company. We have a uniform system of accounts. We have an internal chart of accounts, and we have a summary of earnings chart of accounts. And off to the right in the top, that's kind of just a quick snapshot of some of the summary levels within the internal chart. But if I pick a different chart, the PUC chart, the way I'm displaying my accounts and my summaries on my roll-ups is all different. Extremely valuable flexibility that we've built into, not we, that Invoice built in to the software. What about projects? The same thing applies, right? We can build out as many project structures as we need. Here we have a capital structure, and all the projects up in the top right are summarized differently than they're going to be summarized in the grants and contracts hierarchy. Really cool stuff here. Grants and contracts doesn't have a big build out there, but you get the idea. You can have as many different ways of rolling these things up as you need. And Infor has done a really good job at reconciling, or at least giving visibility into those structures. We're looking at just a form here that's showing each individual structure we have, or hierarchy that we have, and then how it's laid out. And then in the bottom right, what are we not using in that structure? So it allows you to quickly say, oh yeah, you know, this department we didn't need in this structure. So that's why it might show up in your bottom right window. Reporting out of the box is much better than it's been before. We have all of these dimensions that we're setting up. But to take it a step further, we have all these hierarchies within these dimensions that we're building out to satisfy some reporting requirement. That's where the reporting basis steps in. The reporting basis is a pretty little bow that wraps around all of these dimensions and these hierarchies to allow you to pick a single reporting basis and identify how you want to see those financials. What chart am I going to use? What project structure am I going to use? What division structure, what work order structure, and what plant structure? So you're taking all of that setup that you did before, all that configuration, that reorganization, and you're packaging it into a reporting basis that allows you to quickly display financials with those types of structures. And you could have as many reporting bases as you need, rearranging things, dimensions as you need. Standard out of the box, we take those reporting bases and we plop them into an account analysis. We've set up, you know, I could think of an account analysis as like a quick query to show you your financials. In this case, we have an internal reporting basis, and we have an internal chart of accounts behind that that's displaying our balance sheet and our income statement, our assets and our liabilities a certain way. And we pick that reporting basis and our data displays accordingly. I can go back and change my reporting basis to PUC, and the chart, the data at the bottom would display differently. So that reporting basis drives a whole lot of stuff when it comes to Infor BI and some of the standard account or the standard analysis forms within Infor. A quick snapshot of Infor BI, just reinforcing what I'm saying. You pick your finance enterprise group, you pick a reporting basis, and then you can go on to the next step, which is, okay, show me an income statement with this chart of account. Show me an income statement with this cost center structure. So it's the first step to get into all of the reports that you need. Okay, that's enough of me, I think, right?
I'm going to talk a little bit about fund accounting. For some of you, you may not be too interested in fund accounting. You may not even really have any idea what fund accounting is, but if your organization needs to do fund accounting, then you're going to have some interest in this. What fund accounting is, it really is an accounting system for recording your resources whose use has been limited by either the donor, the grant authority, a governing agency, or by law. It really emphasizes accountability rather than profitability. And it's typically used by nonprofit organizations, state, local governments, schools, government-run utility companies. Those are typically those users of fund accounting. And in the past, in N4, really didn't have fund accounting functionality per se. We could use zone balancing to do some of that fund accounting information for us, but we couldn't completely accomplish what we needed to in order to be able to track, a particular fund and what their cash balance might be. We really had to do that outside the system and do some. Typically, it was Excel spreadsheets to do that kind of tracking with. Now, if you'll flip to the next slide, please, Chris. Now, fund accounting functionality has come out in CloudSuite. It was delivered in the April CU, and there are additional enhancements coming later. Don't have too much information about it, but I felt like it was important to make it known and bring some attention to it that the fund accounting functionality actually is out there in CloudSuite. It does come delivered as a disabled feature, so you really have to make the choice if you want to use fund accounting. Plus, there may be a couple of things that you got to consider if you're already live with CloudSuite and you want to move into using fund accounting. I think some of those kind of things are still being worked through and determine the best approach for some of that. There are a couple of key pieces about fund accounting. On the finance enterprise group dimension, you either have to have your fund located in the accounting unit, that's the N4 defined accounting unit dimension, or you must use the user dimension 1 to identify your funds. So that functionality only works on those two dimensions in the current functionality that is delivered. You'll go to the next one. I just have a little visual here of a finance enterprise group, and we've marked in blue that this is where the fund would be identified, and then in your options of your finance enterprise group, it's where you can choose whether or not you want to allow fund accounting to be turned on. The next one, I think I would just want to show you the difference between and a payables released invoice example, where in the current world, without fund accounting being enabled, we would be distributing the expenses of this invoice to 648000 and a particular fund, 100 and 200. And the issue is we can't track that liability by fund. We only get to track it in total because we can only have one accrual account there in payables without fund accounting enabled. The second example there is if we do have fund accounting enabled, then that allows the system to track the payables by fund. You can see now I can have my 100 and 200, so it just follows the expense distribution and creates that payable by fund. The next screen is just a screenshot from the cash code perspective. Is that blurry to anybody else, or is it just my eyes? It may be just my eyes. I really was just trying to illustrate here. I have a cash code. I've called it operating cash code. And with fund accounting functionality turned on, I can assign funds, and I can assign to each fund their claim on the cash in that cash code. And then as transactions come through the system, it will say, oh, you can do edits and validation to say, don't let them overspend their the amount they have claimed to the cash. I can come update these if I need to. But this allows us to be able to track the cash by fund, which we didn't have that ability to do that in prior versions of N4. So that functionality is, it's come out in April. It surely will be expanded. I think there's some of the functionality extends over into AP, AR, and asset management currently, but I do know they're continuing to evaluate and improve that functionality. But just wanted to give a little bit of a glimpse so you can see what's coming and what you may be able to use in the future.
Sure, that sounds great, Cindy. Next up is the integrated AP Invoice workflow. So now our the old APIA, more or less, is an integrated solution in your Payables solution. There's some setup we need to do to get that going. We need to set up some assignment rules and approval codes and routing categories. But the workflow is already built in, and we just need to set that up. I believe Richard Stout earlier said that if you want to go deeper than what Infor is providing, you can absolutely go in to Infor Process Automation and update the existing workflow and tailor or customize that to your needs if you need that. A lot of times the workflow abilities are enough for organizations to use the out-of-the-box setup and functionality. But this is super helpful, right? Now your Payables system, you don't have to rely on a third-party system to manage your invoice approval. Infor can do it for you. Infor's allowing you visibility into that entire life cycle of the invoice, from the moment it's entered into the system through subsequent routings. There's the ability to report on where the invoice is at along that entire workflow. So it's really nice just to have all of that in the ERP instead of interfacing things from different systems into Infor, and you might lose some of that visibility into invoices. And this is an absolutely one of the best things, I think, one of the best functionality enhancements, I think, in CloudSuite. What else? So there's standard workflow events that all we need to do is enable. Minimal setup needs to be done for these. These are out-of-the-box standard workflow events that we can turn on or off if we want them. These are a few of the ones, a few of my favorite things right here. Starting with requesting a new vendor. There is a form or a functionality if you're a requester or a buyer trying to fill out a requisition or a purchase order and you can't find the vendor that you're looking for. There's a button for you to send a request to AP to say, hey, can you guys set up a new vendor? I can't see it. And for the buyers or the requesters to actually fill out some of that information for the vendor. What's the vendor name? What's their address? Some of those things they might not know, but they're not all required fields. So there's a lot of stuff like that out there in these standard workflow events that come with the system. And our job as we're implementing is to make you aware of these and see if it's something that's going to help. Some clients might say, no, we don't want these messages from the buyers to set up new vendors. We're going to stick with our own process, and that's totally fine. But our job as consultants is to educate you on what's out there and how it can help. I have a real life example of this for the very last one, the void payment approval workflow. A client, we're going through the design session, and I said, there's this option out there to turn on an approval for any AP payment that gets voided. And they said, oh, that's awesome. This could have come in handy 2 weeks ago because I had an AP clerk void a couple payments and we're not sure why. This would have stopped that because the void wouldn't have been official until it passed through an approval workflow. So really cool stuff that you can turn on to control some of the things within, whether they're transactions or new configurations like vendors and customers. Another cool one is the journal approval. That's built right into your GL. It takes maybe 5 minutes to set up. It's a flip of a flag, and you build some approval codes, and that's kind of it. It just runs its course from there. What I'm showing up here, these screenshots are just snippets of the Invoice system showing the predefined IPA flow that is behind each one of these workflow events. I don't have one for everyone, but these are some of the most important ones in my eyes when it comes to finance. Requesting new vendors. There's a request new invoice payment as well, kind of like a check request form that can route through its own approval too, so you don't have to grant everyone access to your AP invoice form. There's a request new accounts and request new customers, and there's some cash ledger transaction and payment approvals as well. A lot of cool stuff out there. All right.
I'm going to jump in here and talk a little bit about cash management and the bank reconciliation process. I think this is one of the, I guess it helps organizations really move from the Stone Age into the new world, because we all know bank reconciliations are pretty manual. They're not fun to do. A lot of them are in the paper-based fashion. Many are in Excel or whatever. But this new piece of the functionality from cash management, actually, if you had used cash management, the landmark application on prior to CloudSuite, you probably used a good bit of this. But in CloudSuite, bank reconciliation is all folded in. And this gives us some real-time visibility into your reconciliation progress. You can actually see status of your cash accounts and that kind of stuff on a daily basis if you bring those statements in daily, which would be best practice. You also get the ability to record transactions from the bank statement file as well. In particular, that might be, you get a bank statement that's got your bank fees included in it. Your typical approach is to, go and record those fees with a journal entry in the GL. Pretty manual effort there. And what bank reconciliation process can allow us to do is to actually create those transactions straight from the bank file. So it's a pretty sweet and efficient process that's been included in CloudSuite functionality. You'll go to the next slide. I think there's just a little diagram of the process. For the bank reconciliation process, typically all your cash transactions are entered, released, and journalized via your cash management system and cash ledger. Your bank statement, you can bring it in intraday, or we typically see people are doing that on a daily basis. So you get your bank transactions from the prior day. When that bank statement gets interfaced, there are processing rules that you create and some reconciliation match rules that are used in matching your bank statement lines to your cash ledger transactions. As well as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, if there are some fees, ZBA transfers is another perfect example where you may just record those straight from the bank statement, and you no longer have to do that manual process. Once the system comes in, brings in that file, applies all of those rules, it can auto-reconcile transactions for you. And the goal would be that your rules are such that it would reconcile up to 90–95% of the transactions in your bank statement. I mean, the goal would be 100%, but it's quite frequent that you see 90-95% of those get reconciled automatically. And if there are any exceptions that it couldn't figure out how to reconcile, you can then manually reconcile those exceptions. Once the entire bank statement has been reconciled, you can close the statement, and that day's process is done. Also, as those transactions come in on that bank statement, you could release those, and those would automatically be recorded in the global ledger. And at month end, like, we've reconciled that statement every day. So when we go and do our month end cash account reconciliation in the global ledger, we can go over into Recon Management, and it will bring in that bank statement reconciliation for the last day of that month and bring that information into that reconciliation for me. And if I had any adjustments that were made that didn't get reflected in cash book somewhere, I could have some reconciling items and such. But the process is pretty simple and straightforward and pretty efficient. Plus, your staff is doing the reconciliations on a daily basis, not waiting till month end to do that. And so your close process could be increased a little bit for that as well. I think the next screen that I had to show was simply just a little dashboard showing me my statement reconciliations. You can see on the left there's open bank statements. These are all for one account. And as I go down the rows of that for each day there, the information on the right of the screen would change and tell me, oh, look, these are 100% reconciled. So you can see your balances by day, what payments or categories that you had payments there as well. So it gives you a real good look at what your cash activity is on a daily basis.
All right, last but not least is the ability system, or the system's ability to track everything that you're doing. It's a little frightening. Here we have a audit log for setting up a project. We can see that the very bottom is the latest, or sorry, the most recent is at the top, and the latest change is at the very bottom, the oldest change. You can see here who did it, when they did it, what did they change, and then off to the right, the original description and how that description has changed a little bit later on. There, I highlighted the green part at the bottom because this is just a snapshot of one part of that audit log. There's an entire scroll bar there that you can scroll off to the right. So all those fields on a project are being tracked anytime anyone makes an update or change. Same thing with your GL chart of account. Here's just a snapshot showing all the updates, when you first created it, when it was updated, the actor that updated it, and the time. Not only does it do it for configuration data, it also does it for transactional data like invoices or POs or recs or inventory transactions. Here's a snapshot of a payables invoice audit log, seeing who created it, who updated it. And then this overwhelming screen here is a complete audit log of all of your AP invoice distribution history, starting with when the distribution was originally created to any updates you've made to it, changes to divisions or accounts or amounts. So maybe you want to run this at the end of the year. Let's show me from audit date January 1 through December 31st, what's been changed, and save that off for auditors. You can run this for a specific actor or for a specific person if you are suspicious that people are changing things and they shouldn't be. Here's another similar form, invoice payment history. Same type of parameters. Maybe you want to run this for the whole year to see what payments have been changed. This starts with when the payment was created, when it was reconciled and voided, and anything you're doing to it. You can see off to the side there, I have highlighted the original transaction. So when this payment was created, you see the from value is all blank or 0. and then the two values changed, the check date to April 30th. There's a discount amount on this check, and it was a check for $80,000. So this auditing is all over the place, not just in finance, it's in supply chain, HR, it's everywhere. And I probably should have included a little screenshot here, but at the top of the form, or if you're in a transaction, there's typically an actions drop down, and you click the actions drop down to get to your audit log.